The fluorescent lights above flickered as Karen casually flipped through a fashion magazine, her fingers tapping rhythmically against the cover. The salon was buzzing with the usual mid-afternoon chatter, the sounds of hairdryers, scissors snipping, and the occasional laugh punctuating the air. It was an ordinary scene, until Karen spotted her target. Sitting a few chairs over was a woman, dressed in a sleek black dress, her skin a deep, radiant shade of brown. She was calm, poised, absorbed in her phone. Her presence was the kind that quietly commanded attention, but Karen didn't notice that. Instead, she saw only an opportunity, a chance to pull off the kind of harmless prank she'd become infamous for. Karen had always been the type to push boundaries, to test what she could get away with, always certain that everything would turn out just fine. With a sly grin, she surveyed the room, gauging the reactions of the others. No one seemed to be paying her much attention. Perfect. She grabbed a pair of scissors from the nearby counter, their cold steel gleaming under the salon lights. Her hand trembled with anticipation, but she quickly steadied herself. After all, this was just a harmless prank, a quick snip of hair, a laugh, maybe a few minutes of embarrassment for the woman. But nothing serious, right? Karen's heart raced with a mix of mischief and adrenaline as she approached the woman's chair. She could feel the eyes of the other customers flicking in her direction, but they were nothing compared to the quiet challenge in the air. Slowly, she reached over, and with the precision of someone who'd pulled off pranks before, she clipped a lock of the woman's thick, dark hair. The snip echoed louder than she expected. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The salon seemed to hold its breath. Then the woman, without saying a word, slowly put down her phone. Her movements were smooth, almost deliberate, as she turned her head just enough to lock eyes with Karen. The instant their gazes met, Karen felt a wave of unease roll over her. Something wasn't right. This woman's stare wasn't filled with the typical surprise or frustration Karen had expected. Instead, it was calculating. A kind of cold, precise intensity that made Karen's throat tighten. "Excuse me," the woman's voice was calm, almost too calm. It was a steady rhythm, like a lullaby with a warning hidden beneath it. "Do you know what you've just done?" Karen's lips parted, but the words she had rehearsed in her mind, a joke, an apology, seemed to evaporate in the air between them. She could feel the eyes of the other customers boring into her. The woman didn't raise her voice. She didn't shout. She simply stood up from her chair with the grace of a predator, all while maintaining that chilling gaze. The scissors that had seemed like a tool for amusement now felt heavy in Karen's hand. It was as if time slowed as the woman stepped closer, her presence radiating a power that made Karen's pulse spike. "I ask you a question," the woman said, her voice now carrying an undercurrent of authority. Karen opened her mouth to speak, but her words stuck. The entire room had grown tense, each person seemingly holding their breath, waiting for what would happen next. That's when it hit Karen, the realization that she wasn't dealing with just another customer. She wasn't just a woman whose hair Karen had cut. No, this was something bigger, something far more serious. The weight of her mistakes settled in like a heavy cloud. But what was worse, what froze Karen in place, was the unnerving calmness of the woman standing before her. The woman's lips barely moved as she spoke again. "My name is Carla Williams, and I'm the chief of the FBI." The words landed like a thunderclap in the quiet room, and the shockwave hit Karen full force. She had no idea who this woman was, but now, with that chilling revelation, every single person in the salon shifted in their seats. The air thickened. Karen's heart skipped a beat. She suddenly felt small, as if the entire room had tilted on its axis. This wasn't just any prank gone wrong. This was a nightmare unfolding. As the weight of Carla's identity sank in, Karen's stomach churned with dread. What had she done? And how far would this woman go to make her understand the gravity of her actions? The air in the salon was thick with tension, each breath heavier than the last. Karen's heart pounded in her chest, the rhythmic thud almost deafening in her own ears. Her mouth was dry, her legs weak, as she stood frozen, scissors still clutched in her trembling hand. Carla Williams, the chief of the FBI, stood before her, her eyes unblinking, her expression unreadable. For a split second, it felt like the world had paused, as if time itself had held its breath. The hum of the salon's fluorescent lights faded into the background, leaving only the beating of Karen's heart and the terrifying calm that emanated from Carla. Then, without warning, Carla's voice broke the silence. "You think this is funny?" The question hung in the air, its simplicity only adding to its weight. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her mind raced, scrambling to find some form of explanation, a justification for her thoughtless prank. But none came. What could she say? It was just a joke. How could she possibly explain herself when she had no idea who this woman was, no idea that cutting a stranger's hair would lead her to this moment? Karen glanced around, desperate for a sign, some form of reassurance, but the eyes of the other customers were fixed on her, their gazes heavy and silent. Some looked sympathetic, others simply curious, but none seemed willing to intervene. The weight of Carla's presence pressed down on Karen like a stone, suffocating her. Carla, however, did not move. Her composure was flawless, her posture impeccable. She stood like a queen in a room full of mere mortals, the kind of person who was used to having every eye in the room focused solely on her. "I don't think you understand," Carla continued, her voice barely above a whisper, yet each word cut through the stillness like a blade. "This isn't a game. This isn't some prank you can laugh off. Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Karen's knees wobbled, and she instinctively took a step back, but the movement felt clumsy, weak. She had no escape from Carla's gaze, those deep, knowing eyes that pierced straight through her, cutting away the layers of her bravado. Carla wasn't angry, not in the way Karen had imagined. There was no shouting, no flailing of arms. She was simply beyond anger. The woman was measuring her. "I could have you arrested for assault," Carla added, her voice now sharper, laced with authority. "But I'm not here to make a scene, Karen." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in before taking a small step forward, closing the distance between them. "Not yet, anyway." Karen flinched at the use of her name. How did Carla know her? Was this part of the prank? But no, this was real. The realization hit her like a cold wave. The woman in front of her wasn't just some random stranger. Carla Williams was the head of the FBI, the most powerful law enforcement figure in the country, and Karen had just humiliated her. Her mind was in chaos, but one thought cut through the storm of confusion. How could I have been so stupid? For the first time, Karen felt truly vulnerable. Carla's stillness was like a force of nature, unmoving, inevitable. She knew Karen's every weakness without uttering a single word, and Karen knew that whatever happened next, it would be no small consequence. "I don't want to waste your time, Karen," Carla said, her voice now almost gentle, though no less chilling. "But this is far from over. You're going to learn what happens when you disrespect someone, and you're going to do it a hard way." Karen's stomach twisted, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. She opened her mouth to apologize, but the words felt useless now, trapped behind the knot in her throat. What had she done? Before she could say anything, Carla turned sharply on her heel and walked away, her steps measured and precise. The room seemed to exhale as she moved toward the door, but Karen stood frozen, too stunned to react. She glanced over at the other salon patrons, who were now whispering among themselves, but they, too, seemed to sense the gravity of the situation. No one dared to speak. No one dared to make a sound. And then it hit Karen. This wasn't just about a prank anymore. This was a turning point. She had no idea what was coming next, but the anticipation, the fear of it settled in her chest like a lead weight. As Carla reached the door, she turned back, her eyes locking with Karen one last time. "You've made a serious mistake, but maybe, Just maybe, you'll come to understand what it really means to mess with the wrong person," Carla said, her words dripping with a quiet promise. "Enjoy your last few moments of peace." And with that, she was gone, leaving Karen standing in the middle of the salon, her heart pounding in her ears, the room still, as if waiting for the storm to break. The door slammed shut behind Carla with a sharp finality that seemed to reverberate through the salon. The sudden silence felt suffocating, almost as if the air itself had become heavier. Karen stood frozen in place, her mind desperately trying to process what had just happened. Her thoughts were a tangled mess, spiraling in every direction. But one thing was certain: this was far from over. She blinked, trying to shake off the lingering weight of Carla's icy gaze. Her legs were still shaky, and the scissors in her hand felt like an anchor, dragging her back to the harsh reality of the situation. She looked down at the lock of hair that had fallen to the floor, as though it might offer some explanation, some clarity on how things had gone so horribly wrong. But there was no clarity, just chaos. The salon had returned to its uneasy quiet. The other customers, who had been watching in stunned silence, began murmuring among themselves. Some whispered nervously, casting furtive glances in Karen's direction, while others seemed more interested in the floor or their phones. No one dared to speak to her directly. A few moments passed, and Karen felt the heat of 1,000 eyes on her back, all of them waiting, silently, for something to happen. But what could she do? What could she say? She hadn't expected this. How could she have known? She never would have done it if she had known who Carla was. But now, with the FBI chief's identity looming over her like a dark cloud, she could already feel the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. Without warning, Karen's phone buzzed in her pocket, the sudden sound like a jolt of electricity through her body. She fumbled to pull it out, her fingers stiff and clumsy. The screen lit up with an unfamiliar number, and her heart skipped a beat. She hesitated for a moment, but her curiosity won out. She swiped to answer. "Karen," a low voice said, calm but undeniably firm. "This is Special Agent Nicole Hartman with the FBI. We need to speak." Karen's breath caught in her throat. The realization that this wasn't some random prank, that Carla wasn't just a regular person she could brush off, settled deep in her chest. She opened her mouth, but no words came. The room felt like it was spinning. "Are you alone?" Agent Hartman asked. Yes," Karen stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. What is this about?" You don't have to pretend, Karen," the agent interrupted smoothly. "We know exactly what happened in that salon. We're giving you an opportunity to cooperate." There was a pause then. "But you should know, this is not just about a haircut. This is about something far more serious." The words hit Karen like a physical blow. Her mind raced, trying to grasp the full weight of what was happening. She felt the familiar heat of panic rise in her chest, choking her, but she forced herself to remain still, to breathe. "I need you to meet me," Agent Hartman continued. "We're giving you a chance to explain yourself. If you fail to cooperate, the consequences will escalate." Karen's stomach churned. What consequences? The thought of being arrested, of having her life upended because of a momentary lapse in judgment, made her dizzy. She opened her mouth, trying to speak, but the agent cut her off again. "You've made a serious mistake, Karen," the voice on the other end said, colder now. "And while the FBI typically handles situations like this discreetly, this is no longer just about a prank. This is about authority and respect, and you will understand that soon enough." The phone clicked, and Karen was left holding the device to her ear, the eerie silence in the salon now deafening. Her fingers trembled as she lowered the phone slowly, the weight of the conversation settling heavily in her mind. This was no longer just a misunderstanding. This wasn't a prank gone wrong. She was about to step into a storm. The thought hung in the air, thick and heavy. What had Carla meant when she said that Karen had messed with the wrong person? What kind of trouble had she just walked into? Carla hadn't raised her voice, hadn't even broken a sweat. But Karen now understood. She'd been an unwitting player in a game far beyond her understanding. She looked around the salon again, as if the answer might reveal itself in the faces of the other patrons, but they were all still, watching, waiting. And Karen knew, with cold certainty, that she couldn't run from this. No, she had no choice now. She had to face the consequences of her actions, and whatever Carla had in store for her, it was only just beginning. Karen couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on her as she stood in the middle of the salon, frozen in place. The weight of her phone call with Agent Hartman pressed down on her like a lead weight, suffocating any hope she had left of escaping the consequences. She glanced around the room again, but the patrons had resumed their business, as if the tension in the air wasn't thick enough to cut with a knife. Her heart pounded in her chest. What had she gotten herself into? This wasn't some harmless prank anymore. This was real. Carla's cool composure, the way she'd spoken, every detail now echoed in Karen's mind, making the air feel impossibly heavy. Karen had done something so reckless, so dangerous, and she was only now starting to realize the depth of her mistake. As she walked to the exit, her steps unsteady and hesitant, she could barely hear the soft whispers from the other customers behind her. Her stomach was in knots, her hands slick with sweat, as she gripped her purse tightly. The moment she stepped outside into the cold evening air, the chill didn't help. If anything, it made her feel even more exposed. She pulled out her phone and stared at the unfamiliar number from the FBI agent, her thoughts racing in 100 different directions. But before she could decide what to do next, her phone buzzed again. Another call. This time, she didn't hesitate. Karen, the same cold voice greeted her. It's Agent Hartman again. We have a meeting scheduled for you. Be ready at 7:00 p.m. sharp. We'll pick you up. You have no choice but to comply. Karen's throat tightened. What do you want from me? I didn't mean to. We'll explain everything when you get here, Hartman interrupted, her tone firm and final. Be ready and don't make any attempts to run. You're already in too deep for that. The line went dead, leaving Karen in stunned silence. For a moment, she stood there, the streets buzzing around her, but she was numb to it all. How had she gotten here? What had seemed like an innocent prank, something she could laugh off, had spiraled into something far darker. The thought of FBI agents descending upon her life, her actions now under a magnifying glass, felt overwhelming. She couldn't escape the fact that this wasn't just a mistake. It was a pivotal moment. And she was at the center of it. Karen's mind raced. What would the FBI do? Was this some kind of test? Was Carla orchestrating something bigger than she could comprehend? She looked at her phone again, trying to make sense of it. She needed to tell someone. Her family. Her friends. They would never believe this. They'd never understand how a simple prank had escalated into something that might very well ruin her life. But what could she say? Hey, I cut the wrong woman's hair, and now the FBI is involved. No, that wouldn't cut it. Her feet carried her slowly toward her apartment, but she was barely aware of the path she was walking. The weight of the situation was crushing her. What was the real reason behind Carla's calm reaction? Was there something she wasn't seeing? And why had Agent Hartman been so cryptic about everything? By the time Karen reached her apartment, the sunset had blurred into the horizon, leaving the sky a deep shade of purple. She felt the cold settle into her bones as she climbed the stairs, her mind spinning, trying to come up with a way out. But the truth was, there was no way out. She was trapped in a web of her own making. As she stood in front of her door, the phone buzzed once more, a message lighting up the screen. 7:00 p.m. sharp. Don't make us come find you. The words hung in her mind like a warning bell. What was waiting for her at that meeting? She had no answers, only the gnawing suspicion that this wasn't just about the prank anymore. The FBI had their eyes on her for a reason, and whatever Carla had planned, Karen wasn't ready for it. But she had no choice now. The consequences were already in motion, and she could only brace herself for what was to come. The clock on Karen's wall ticked loudly as she paced back and forth in her apartment, the sound almost deafening in the silence. She had a half hour before 7:00 p.m. The waiting was unbearable, each minute stretching on like an eternity. Every sound in her apartment felt magnified. The hum of the fridge, the distant honking of cars outside, the rhythmic thud of her own footsteps as she moved back and forth. She glanced at the window. The last slivers of daylight were fading, replaced by the growing darkness of evening. The streets below were busy, alive with the usual urban energy, but Karen felt as if she were the only one trapped in this frozen moment. The weight of Agent Hartman's words lingered in her mind, like a dark shadow that wouldn't leave. Be ready. Don't make us come find you. She couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom, the constant gnawing fear that there was something far worse on the horizon. It wasn't just about the prank anymore. It was about power. Control. The FBI didn't do nothing. They didn't show up to deal with a harmless joke. There had to be more. Something Carla hadn't told her. Karen's thoughts spiraled. Had Carla been watching her before the prank? Had the whole thing been a setup? It seemed almost too insane to believe, but the way Carla had spoken, so calm, so in control, suggested that she was always one step ahead. The puzzle pieces didn't fit, and yet the more Karen tried to make sense of it, the more unsettling it became. She glanced at the clock again. 6:45 p.m. Her nerves were stretched thin. Every few seconds, she checked her phone for messages, but none came. Would they show up on time? What would happen when they did? A chill ran through her, not from the cold air, but from the rising fear of the unknown. The knock on the door was sharp, sudden, like a gunshot in the silence. Karen froze, her heart leaping in her chest. The doorframe seemed to close in around her, and she struggled to swallow. For a split second, she wondered if she should just pretend she wasn't home, escape through the back door. But the FBI, they'd find her. They were trained to find people who didn't want to be found. Slowly, she forced herself to walk toward the door, each step feeling like it was taking her deeper into a nightmare. Her hand trembled as she reached for the doorknob. Her breath caught in her throat. When she opened the door, two figures stood in the hallway. Both wore dark suits, their expressions unreadable. One was a tall, imposing man with broad shoulders, his face stern and unyielding. The other, a woman, was lean, with dark eyes that seemed to pierce right through Karen. The man spoke first, his voice deep and commanding. "Karen Thompson?" he asked, and there was no question in his tone, only the certainty that he already knew the answer. Karen nodded, her throat dry, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, that's me." The woman stepped forward, her gaze never leaving Karen's face. "We're with the FBI. Special Agent Nicole Hartman is expecting you. You'll come with us now." A chill shot down Karen's spine. She nodded wordlessly, stepping aside to let them in. As they entered her small apartment, it felt like the walls were closing in. The tall man scanned the room briefly, then turned back to Karen. "Do you have everything you need? No bags packed, no hasty decisions." Her eyes flicked to the couch, to the small, cluttered kitchen counter. Her entire life was here, her apartment, her possessions. But in this moment, it all felt insignificant. All of it was about to be turned upside down. Just let me grab my phone," Karen stammered, her words faltering as she scrambled to grab her device from the table. She felt their eyes on her, and it made her skin prickle. She couldn't even breathe without feeling like they were evaluating her every move. The man nodded, though his gaze was cold. "Hurry up." Karen quickly grabbed her phone, the device feeling heavier than ever in her hand. The screen was still blank. No more messages from Agent Hartman. No last-minute instructions, just the terrifying silence. "Let's go," the woman said flatly, her eyes narrowing. Karen nodded, stepping out of the apartment. She had no idea what was waiting for her, but there was no turning back now. They guided her down the hallway, and into the elevator. The doors slid shut with a quiet chime, the descent down to the lobby slow and deliberate. The tension in the elevator was palpable. Karen could almost feel the weight of their eyes on her, their presence looming over her like a shadow she couldn't escape. The hum of the elevator cables was deafening, and Karen felt her heartbeat in her throat. Each floor they passed seemed to carry her deeper into the unknown. When the doors finally opened on the ground floor, the cool night air rushed in, and the two agents escorted Karen into an unmarked black SUV waiting at the curb. The man opened the door for her, his expression unchanged. With a final glance at her apartment, Karen slid into the back seat, the door closing behind her with a soft click. The SUV pulled away from the curb, the streetlights flickering in the rearview mirror as the city melted away in the distance. Where were they taking her? And what would Carla Williams want from her now? The answers seemed just out of reach, but Karen knew one thing for certain. She was about to find out. The SUV's tires hummed steadily against the asphalt, the monotonous sound only amplifying the silence that pressed in on Karen from all sides. She sat in the back seat, her hands gripping the fabric of her jeans, her mind racing. The city outside the window blurred as the cars sped through dark streets, the familiar glow of streetlights flickering past in a rhythmic pulse. The two agents sat in the front, their expressions unreadable, their eyes fixed on the road ahead. The tall man's broad shoulders were tense, the woman beside him so still she could have been carved from stone. Not a word passed between them, and Karen felt as though the air itself was thick with unspoken judgment. It was as if they were waiting for her to break, to speak, to show some sign of weakness. But she remained silent, her breath shallow and uneven, her thoughts racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. The seconds felt like hours, and Karen's thoughts spiraled out of control. What was going on? Where were they taking her? She had so many questions, but no one was offering answers. The feeling of being trapped by her own actions, by the weight of something much larger than herself, gnawed at her insides. And then a thought hit her with brutal clarity. Carla Williams, the FBI chief, was at the center of this. She'd been watching Karen. She'd orchestrated this, and Karen had unwittingly played her part. "Where are we going?" Karen finally asked, her voice shaky but determined. The question hung in the air like a challenge, and the woman in the passenger seat turned her head slightly, her eyes narrowing as if evaluating whether Karen deserved an answer. "We're almost there," the woman replied coolly, her voice devoid of emotion. "You'll know soon enough." The words were like a trap, a door Karen was too scared to open, but she couldn't avoid it. The silence stretched on, suffocating her, until the vehicle suddenly veered off the main road and into a narrow, shadowed lane. The familiar cityscape dissolved into the night as they drove deeper into an area Karen didn't recognize. The streets grew quieter, darker, the buildings more spaced out. Every corner felt unfamiliar, every turn more unsettling. The car finally slowed, pulling up in front of an imposing building. It was a stark, modern structure. Sleek black windows, sharp edges, and no signs. Nothing to indicate its purpose. It could have been a government facility, or something much more secretive. The engine shut off, and the woman in the front seat turned to look at Karen again. Her eyes were like ice, sharp and calculating. "Get out." Karen hesitated, her pulse hammered in her ears. This wasn't a regular government building. There were no crowds, no cameras, no signs of life. This was something hidden, something meant to be out of sight, out of reach. Her gut twisted with instinctual fear. As if reading her mind, the man in the driver's seat spoke for the first time. "You're here because you made a mistake, and now you're going to fix it." The cold finality in his voice sent a chill down her spine. She wasn't just being punished. No, this was about something else. What did they want from her? She stepped out of the car, her legs shaky beneath her. The woman led the way, her steps confident and purposeful as they entered the building. Karen was about to follow when the man placed a hand on her shoulder, guiding her gently, yet firmly. "Don't try anything stupid," he muttered, his breath warm against her ear. "You can't run from this. You're already in too deep." His words were like an invisible weight pressing down on her chest. There was no escape. She was already tangled in whatever web they had spun, and trying to break free would only make it worse. Inside the building, the atmosphere was sterile. Cold marble floors, high ceilings, and walls that seemed to stretch on forever. The air smelled faintly of metal and antiseptic. It was a place meant for business, not comfort. The woman stopped in front of an elevator, pressing the button without hesitation. The doors opened silently, revealing the sleek, dimly lit interior. Karen stepped inside, her heart hammering in her chest. She wanted to scream, to run, but the cold reality of her situation crushed any hope of escape. She was trapped, and they knew it. The elevator doors closed, and for a moment, Karen was alone with her thoughts. The hum of the elevator as it descended seemed deafening in the silence. Her mind was a storm, swirling with questions, fears, and doubts. She kept replaying Carla's words over and over in her head. "You've made a serious mistake. You're going to learn what it means to mess with the wrong person." And then it hit her. The whole thing, this entire chain of events, was a test of power, of control. Carla Williams wasn't just punishing her for a joke. No, this was about sending a message, a warning, to Karen and to anyone else who might think they could mess with someone so untouchable, so powerful. The elevator slowed, and the doors opened to a dimly lit hallway. At the end, a door stood ajar, and Karen could just make out figures moving within. She was no longer in control. The door was closing behind her, and there was no way out. The woman stepped forward, her eyes still locked on Karen. It's time to meet Carla. And Karen's world, once again, shifted on its axis. The door creaked open with a low groan, and Karen felt her breath catch in her throat. She stepped forward hesitantly, her pulse racing as she entered the dimly lit room. The walls were lined with sleek, modern furniture, but there was nothing welcoming about the space. It felt cold, clinical, like a place meant for decisions, not comfort. The only light came from a few strategically placed overhead bowls that cast harsh shadows across the floor, adding to the sense of foreboding. At the center of the room stood Carla Williams. Karen froze. Carla was standing by a large, polished desk, her back to Karen. The woman had changed into a dark, tailored suit that only enhanced her commanding presence. She turned slowly, and for a moment, Karen was struck by how composed, how utterly unshakable Carla seemed. The faintest glimmer of a smile curled at the corners of Carla's lips, though there was no warmth in it. It was a smile that suggested Karen had walked into a carefully set trap, and now it was time for her to pay the price. "Karen," Carla said, her voice smooth and controlled, "I've been expecting you." Karen's stomach twisted. She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to respond. Everything in her screamed to run, to turn around and escape before it was too late, but her legs felt rooted to the floor. She was caught. There was no escape from this moment. Carla walked toward her, each step deliberate, measured. As she approached, Karen noticed the slight gleam in Carla's eyes, sharp, calculating. Carla was watching her, analyzing her, as if she were a puzzle that needed solving. "You must be wondering why you're here," Carla continued, her tone not unkind, but devoid of sympathy. "Why the FBI is involved in something as trivial as a haircut. Why you've been dragged into a game that you never asked to play." Karen swallowed hard, her voice trembling as she finally spoke. I never meant for this to happen. It was just a prank. I didn't know who you were. I didn't." Carla raised a hand, cutting her off. "I know exactly what you thought, Karen. You thought it would be funny. You thought you could get away with it, like you could just cut someone's hair and laugh it off." Karen's heart pounded in her chest. Carla's eyes locked onto hers, and Karen felt a chill run through her. The calmness in Carla's voice was unnerving, It wasn't the reaction she expected from someone who had been humiliated in front of a group of strangers. It was the reaction of someone who knew exactly how to make people bend to their will. "The problem is, Karen," Carla continued, "that your little joke didn't just affect me. It affected everything I've built. It's a reflection of your lack of respect. And that's something I can't let slide." Karen took a step back, her mind spinning. She had no idea where this was going, what the true stakes were. "What do you want from me?" Carla leaned forward slightly, her gaze piercing. "You're not in control here, Karen. You haven't been for a long time. This isn't about me. It's about showing you the consequences of taking things too far. It's about teaching you something valuable." Karen's hands began to sweat, her mind racing through possible scenarios. She wanted to scream, to fight back, but her voice was lost somewhere deep inside her chest. This wasn't a simple mistake anymore. This was a war of power, and she was completely outmatched. "Do you know what happens to people who cross me?" Carla asked, her voice now barely above a whisper, as though she were sharing a dark secret. "They learn the hard way. It's not a lesson you can forget easily." The room seemed to close in around Karen, the weight of Carla's words settling on her like a crushing blow. The agents who had escorted her stood quietly in the corner, their eyes unwavering, their stance rigid. This wasn't just a warning. It wasn't just about a haircut. Karen had done something far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. "I'll give you one chance," Carla said, straightening up. Her eyes softened just a fraction, but the calculation remained. "You can walk out of here tonight with a warning. A chance to make things right. You'll cooperate fully, and this will be nothing more than a blip on your record. Or you can push back, refuse to listen, and I'll make sure you regret it for the rest of your life." Karen's heart raced, her breath shallow and quick. The weight of Carla's words hung in the air, suffocating her. It was as if her entire life, her future, was dangling by a single thread. And all it took was one wrong move, one wrong decision, for everything to shatter. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. What could she say? What could she possibly offer? She was trapped. She had no power here. Carla took another step toward her, her eyes gleaming with a cold determination that made Karen's stomach twist. "It's up to you, Karen," Carla said, her voice low and dangerous. "Choose wisely." The room seemed to go still, as though time itself had paused, holding its breath. And in that moment, Karen realized there was no way out of this, no way to undo the mistake she'd made. All she could do now was wait for Carla's next move. The choice was no longer hers to make. The seconds stretched into an unbearable eternity, each one heavier than the last. Karen's heart thundered in her chest, and the silence around her seemed to grow thicker, suffocating her with every breath she took. Carla stood before her, a figure of icy control, her gaze never wavering, her presence like a force of nature that Karen could neither challenge nor escape. The two agents lingered in the background, watching like silent sentinels, waiting for something to happen. Karen's mind raced, the gravity of her situation sinking deeper with each passing moment. The offer Carla had given her was a cruel one. Accept the consequences with grace, and walk away with a warning, or fight back and face the full fury of a power far beyond anything she had ever imagined. But what exactly would that fury entail? What was Carla capable of? I don't know what to do," Karen whispered, the words trembling out of her mouth, barely audible. Her voice felt small, powerless in the face of Carla's quiet authority. Carla's eyes flickered, her lips curling into that same cold smile. "Of course you don't. You've never had to make a choice like this before. Not like this." Karen swallowed hard. The room seemed to close in on her, the walls pressing against her with invisible weight. Her legs felt weak, as though they might give way at any moment, but she kept her feet planted, refusing to show the fear that gripped her insides. "Why me?" Karen blurted out suddenly, the question escaping before she could stop herself. "Why did you choose me for this? For this? test. Carla tilted her head, her eyes narrowing just slightly as if considering the question. Then she stepped forward, her gaze never leaving Karen's face. Because you thought you could get away with it. Because you thought there were no consequences to your actions. And I'm here to make you understand the price of that kind of thinking. Karen's mind reeled. It wasn't just about the haircut. It was about something far bigger. It was about power. Carla's power. And a lesson she was determined to teach Karen. A lesson about control. About the delicate line between innocence and consequence. A lesson that Karen had crossed without even realizing it. You're here because you've shown that you're willing to act without understanding the consequences, Carla continued, her voice calm but deadly. You thought it was funny to humiliate me, but you failed to realize the world doesn't work that way. I don't just let things slide. Karen's pulse quickened. The weight of Carla's words pressed against her chest like an iron vise. This wasn't just about her mistake. This was about someone much more powerful teaching her a lesson she would never forget. And as terrifying as that was, Karen couldn't help but wonder, what exactly was Carla going to do to her now? The agents in the room seemed to hold their breath, the tension palpable. It felt as though the air itself was thick with impending action, each second an eternity of anticipation. Karen's mind raced, desperately searching for a way out. She thought of her family, her friends, the life she had worked so hard to build. Was it all going to end here, in this cold, clinical room, at the mercy of someone she had unknowingly crossed? And then, as if sensing the weight of Karen's thoughts, Carla's voice broke the silence once again. Your choice is simple, Karen, she said, her tone almost too soft, too calm. You can walk out of here, and we'll leave you be. We'll forget all about the prank. But you'll remember it forever. You'll always remember that you got lucky. That you were spared. Or, she let the word hang in the air like a silent threat. You can try to run, to resist. But that will only make things worse for you. Understand? The choice hung in the air, suffocating Karen, and the realization hit her with crushing clarity. There was no way out. No escape from the consequences of her actions. She had stepped into a world far beyond her understanding, and the only way out was to accept it, to submit. Karen's throat tightened as the weight of the decision settled over her like a heavy shroud. The room seemed to tilt, the edges of her vision blurring as if the world were spinning faster than she could grasp. She wanted to scream, to shout that she had made a mistake, that she never meant for things to go this far. But the reality was unavoidable. Carla was in control, and there was no going back. I understand, Karen said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. She could feel the sting of defeat, the harsh taste of surrender in her mouth, but there was no other choice. Not now. Not here. Carla's eyes softened, just slightly. She stepped back, her posture shifting ever so slightly, as though Karen's response had satisfied some unseen expectation. She gave a small nod, the faintest hint of approval crossing her face. Good, Carla said, her voice warm now, almost affectionate, but with that dangerous edge still present. You'll learn the value of knowing your place, Karen. You'll remember this. Always. And just like that, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The tension eased, and Karen felt a flicker of relief, though it was quickly overshadowed by the realization that nothing would ever be the same again. Carla had won. The agents nodded in unison, stepping forward as though their job was done, and Karen's heart sank with the weight of her decision. She had chosen to walk away, but at what cost? As the agents led her out of the room, her steps felt like she was walking in a dream, the weight of everything pressing down on her. She had entered a game she didn't understand, and the only thing she knew for certain now was this: her life would never be the same again.